Hello and welcome to another episode of Let's Talk, exploring the issues affecting all of our lives. I'm your host, Austin Harris. Today we once again return to Parliament, this time for a final recap of the 3 days which made up the third meeting of the 2021-2022 session, which featured a very important question of national importance raised by the opposition. To better enable us to understand the question and the response, it is our pleasure to once again host the Leader of the Opposition, the Hon Roy McTaggart, as our guest. Mr. Leader, Mr. McTaggart, thank you very much for being our guest once again here on Let's Talk.
Good day to you too, Austin, and thank you very much for hosting me again. Glad to be here on your show.
So, Mr. Leader, let's talk. On Thursday, we provided a recap of the parliamentary agenda with the assistance of the former Deputy Leader of the Opposition, Mr. Alva Suku. What struck us both as peculiar was the remarkable haste in which the government concluded their own agenda. I believe the meeting concluded by 3 p.m. The majority of the day was spent amending various laws that were passed by the previous administration. I wonder if you could share with us your thoughts on the opening day, that would be the Wednesday, of the most recent parliamentary meetings.
Yeah. Well, I think what was most telling about this session is, as you mentioned, the absence of any real substance to the meeting in terms of the government agenda. There were 6. First of all, I would say it was the first meeting of the Parliament since November of last year when we met to do the budget. So, 7 months later, and there's no real legislation on the agenda dealing with the government's legislative agenda and their policies. So nothing there. What was there were those 6 pieces of legislation, which were very minor in nature in terms of their content, but were more cleanup exercises or housekeeping exercises to amend existing legislation that needed to be dealt with. And so, yes, we were able to complete the government business, all of it, by 3 o'clock on the Wednesday afternoon. That left us then with the only thing left on the agenda then was for the opposition's business, and that normally takes place on the Thursday. Mm-hmm. And we obviously were not ready to deal with our business at that time.
Right.
So I asked the Speaker really to suggested to the Speaker that we adjourn until Thursday morning to allow us to be prepared to deal with our business. And we were prepared when we went in on Thursday morning.
Well, speaking of the Thursday, I believe it was the Thursday meeting that provided the majority of the highlights of this most recent parliamentary agenda, and that is coming from the opposition more so than the government. The opposition brought 2 very timely and relevant private members' motions, one dealing with stamp duty for first-time Caymanian homebuyers, and the other sought to level the playing field for local bars. But equally as important was a question of national importance, which you asked of the government, and I believe we have a clip of it. Let's perhaps take a look at it and then get your response thereafter.
I'm not suggesting that every one of these suggestions can be implemented or accepted. I give them and I offer them to the government as examples of what could be done. And I hope that they will give them due consideration. Mr. Speaker, I'm determined not to let this session of Parliament end without hearing from the Premier or some other member of the government on this matter. And so, Mr. Speaker, I do conclude my presentation this evening, and I ask the question, Premier, please tell us what your government's thoughts and plans are to provide meaningful relief from the rampant inflation and associated high cost of living that Caymanians are continuing to experience. And I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Your thoughts, Mr. Leader, an opportunity to expand on those remarks.
Sure. Well, the whole issue of the rising cost of living is one that has become of national importance. And there's not a day that goes by that you don't hear some comment from the populace about the difficulties and challenges that they are facing. I was optimistic, or I had an expectation that at some point during this session that one of the statements the Premier would make would be something about the cost of living, that he would address it in some way. We saw that he did speak to it briefly at the RF conference earlier that morning, but after we convened Parliament, there was nothing from him in the statements that they delivered. And to be honest with you, Austin, I was determined. I was not going to let the session pass without trying to force the government to make some statement, let the people hear what it is their thoughts are and what they are planning to do about the whole issue of cost of living. And so I was able to get the agreement of the Speaker to allow me to ask the question on the adjournment of the House later that day, because there was nothing there for the government to be done, and our business was going to be ending anyway.
Right.
So I prevailed upon him, and he agreed to allow me to bring forward the question at that time. Now, something that the public just don't know is that after he agreed, he did the right thing too, and let the government bench know that this was coming forward at the conclusion on the adjournment, and that they would have to respond. So that kind of sent them in a real frenzy is the only way I can describe it, because they all immediately huddled into the large committee room of Parliament, and they were in there for the better part of between 4 and 5 hours.
Now, that was the other historical point. Not only did the first meeting end quicker than it's ever ended, but it was also the longest lunch break. I think 4.5 hours, I believe.
I think that was a comment made by my colleague from Red Bay, that longest lunch break in history.
Yes, right.
In Parliament. But in any event, they did come forward and make their statement, which the Premier then further amplified on the Friday morning, because we did go back in, because there were a few more reports and financial statements to be tabled, annual reports to be tabled prior to the adjournment. So we did go back briefly, and then we adjourned into, the Finance Committee. Now I want to deal briefly too with the two private members' motions, and I want to really thank my colleagues, David White, Georgetown West, Barbara Connolly from Georgetown South, and Sir Alden from Red Bay, for their private members' motions, as you mentioned, both topics. They were both accepted by the government, in which we are truly grateful for, that they saw the validity in what we were asking. We did have some concern with the approach that the minister indicated he would be taking with regard to dealing with the whole issue of leveling the playing field for our local bars in terms of the playing of soft background music, because they are the only subset in the whole tourism and that segment of Caymanian economy that are prevented from legally playing background music, and we think that's unfair. So the timeline there, we think, could be far too long to give any meaningful relief to them, because he wants to consider it as part of a wholesale review of the music and dancing law. And I think that will be years before it's going to be, it's going to be dealt with, unless it really gets, comes to the forefront and they think it's that important to get it done. The issue too of the relief in stamp duty relief for first-time Caymanian buyers, we do believe that will get, quite a bit of attention, because I know it's a priority as well for this government.
Yes.
And I think that we will see, action sooner than later with regard to that. Also had a number of other questions. There were questions on education that MLA Connolly, I should say, Member of Parliament, Barbara Connolly, asked of the minister, and we were fortunate to get those questions answered and get that information out into the public domain, so that people are aware of what's happening in the schools.
Certainly. And to the audience, again, anyone can go back to the Cayman Islands Government YouTube page and see rebroadcasts of the various days of Parliament. Now, maybe it was just me, but going back to the question of national importance, I wasn't filled with overwhelming confidence in the Premier's response to your question. Quite to the contrary, the government seemed to have taken the question perhaps not in the spirit that it was intended, but instead seemed to focus more on chastising the opposition for asking the question and really responding to it. Again, I believe we have a clip of the Premier's response. Again, let's have a quick listen and then get your thoughts thereafter.
Mr. Speaker, I only wish the member, the leader, honorable leader of the opposition, had brought a motion to deal with this issue in the way the others have been brought.
Your thoughts on the Premier's response?
Well, I thought his opening statement that he preferred it to be done as a motion rather than as a question. Very interesting. I mean, this is a huge issue. It's a huge national issue. It's not just local, it is international, it is worldwide. And so I felt it important that I ask the question. I felt also too that the government should have been prepared for this, and that it is one that requires a response and a statement from the government as to what they are doing. And as I said to you in one of the previous questions, it took them nearly 5 hours to back in the committee room to develop their response and what the statement the Premier made that afternoon in Parliament. I think it's important, and I want to stress it, in asking the question, I also took the opportunity to offer up some solutions that they could consider. And I made it clear that the list that I gave them would not be exhaustive, but there are things that could be done and considered by government that could and would give immediate release to the population with regard to dealing with the high cost of living. Of course, we talked about the cost of living adjustment. I mentioned that, but I recommended that it be given to all public servants, not just the civil service. I suggested also that they could look at a rollback of fuel and diesel taxes, that not just on electricity consumption, but on just regular purchase of gas and diesel, that they could consider rolling that back for a period of 6 months. That would give some major relief to the populace. I also suggested a rollback of the pension, an extension of the pension holiday to the end of December, because that's scheduled to kick in again on the 1st of July. And that's going to be a major blow and hurt to people when they're starting to see 5% of their salary being deducted for pensions, and also on the part of the employer, who is reeling as well from the effects of it, is going to have to pay an additional 5%. So that's going to be quite interesting to see how that's going to be dealt with, and what the public have to say about that. I also suggested that they could consider increasing the assistance that they provide for those who are in need, pensioners, and also government retirees, and those who get financial assistance from the government. Again, they are on fixed incomes from the government, and don't have much flexibility in terms of disposable income. So it's really important for them. And then I also suggested that it could continue this COVID stipends through to the end of the year, even at the reduced amount, I think, of $750 a month. I think it would go a long way towards helping people, because we are seeing, and that tourism isn't anywhere near at levels that it was prior to COVID. And in fact, I think for the month of May, we found that we were at probably 50% thereabouts in terms of where we were in 2019. So essentially 3 years later, and we're at 50% of the 2019 levels. So people in the tourism industry and who's work there are still hurting from this and could use assistance. They've got zero disposable income right now. There are other examples of things that I think government should consider as well. I didn't mention these, but they did come to mind, following the meeting. And one is that they could, if indeed CUC is looking to raise their rates, which they would be, I believe, entitled to based on current levels of inflation, that government work and have discussions with them to defer any potential increases so that people don't have to deal with that issue as well. And I know that in the case of the Water Authority, they recently made a request to OFREG for a rate increase. I know that it was deferred, and I would suggest that perhaps government consider response should be that to the Water Authority, not now. Mm-hmm. It is actually a government authority, government owned. So they have that flexibility that they could make that concession and not do it immediately, but to give some release. So I really am glad for the civil service COLA. They deserve it, although I would have preferred to see the government go further and extend it to all public servants.
Yes.
And so in effect, they're pensioners and the remaining public servants. They really don't benefit from what government has proposed and what they're doing. When you look also at the second thing that they proposed, which is the electricity assistance program that's going to roll out here in July, August, and September, that looks promising, because that will put dollars immediately into people's hands. And so I think that is promising. It all depends too on how, the process that they have to establish in order for people to access this funding. And it seems to me timeline seems short in order for the government to be able to put the infrastructure and the policies and the procedures in place for this program to be successfully rolled out in July and continue through August and September. So they've got their work cut out for them, but it's not impossible.
Yeah.
And we'll just have to wait and see. It looks promising.
Certainly, thank you for that. And we noted that the Deputy Premier acknowledged that the government would be accepting or continuing the COLA for civil servants. We know the Premier also introduced a new energy savings initiative, a deal they'd struck with CUC, which I thought would go a long way. But he also spent a great deal of time talking about some of the other initiatives, which struck me as being more in relation to what the previous administration had started under the pre-COVID and post-COVID relief efforts, but he was using them perhaps as his response to cost of living, and I thought they were a bit out of time. I don't know what your thoughts were on that.
Well, I do have to agree with you. I mean, he spent quite a bit of time going back over the things that had been done, but I think the important thing is to remind the public and everyone that those initiatives that were implemented had nothing to do with the present crisis at hand. And to simply seek to say that this is how we have been addressing it is, I don't think that's proper or right, because they were done for other reasons and have nothing to do, no bearing on the current crisis at hand with the cost of living. They do help. None of those initiatives are good. We support them, but had nothing to do with what's taking place today.
Indeed. Now, again, you mentioned that it took the government some 5 hours to develop a response to your question of national importance on the Thursday. The Premier then amended to that response on the Friday with a statement, again, adding to those remarks. We don't have a clip, but I do have a written copy of the Premier's remarks where he says, Mr. Speaker, since getting elected, the PAC government has taken more than a dozen substantive actions to lower costs for some of the most vulnerable in our society. I know I provided this information yesterday, but it is worth repeating again today because the opposition may have forgotten. I want to go through them very quickly and ask specifically, are these initiatives to address cost of living, or are these initiatives those that perhaps began under the previous administration? The first, free school lunches. ESO related or initiatives started by the previous administration?
Well, let me just make some statement with regard to what they have proposed, and it is clear there. They initially he outlined a lot of programs that they have done, but Austin, I think if you take a look at it and look at it reasonably and objectively, none of these policies were established in response to the issue of the higher cost of living and the current crisis that we face. And that's what we have to describe this as. It is a crisis. And as the Premier said, it's going to get worse. So harder times are coming. If they aren't already all here, it's going to get worse. And it'll get a lot worse before it gets better. But if we can just have a copy here too.
Yes.
Can we just talk through this for a minute?
Sure, absolutely.
And a number of these things. But free school lunches, okay, I give them credit for that. They very first thing, one first thing they did, they brought that policy out and provided free school lunches for all people, all people in public schools. Now we had done a program similarly for students during the COVID lockdown period, because they were getting, not everyone was getting, but many of our students were getting free lunches during the normal school term. And so we continued that and made sure that they received the meals during the lockdown as well.
Indeed.
But they have taken it further and provided it for all. They reduced certain fees for senior. Well, we started that program. That was part of our older policy statement. No relation or bearing on the cost of living today and the crisis today. Removed the import duty on certain food items and essential family items. Well, that was an issue we all campaigned on. But again, it wasn't related to this crisis. I'm grateful to see them do it. They acted, and they acted quite swiftly on it to get that done. Continued the displaced tourism worker stipend for another year. That's COVID related, not cost of living related issue at hand. Financial support to employees, again COVID related. Financial support to small and medium sized businesses, all COVID related. The insurance premium payment assistance program, again COVID related. In fact, we just approved supplementary funding last week in Parliament for the continuation of that program. But again, indications from the minister with responsibility for it, that program will be coming to an end. Provided free masks, LFTs, and free testing. Nothing to do with cost of living. They've been doing that from day one of the pandemic. And again, reintroduced private school grants and dispersed over $2 million. Yes, they did include grants of $2 million in the current year's budget, but not cost, not directly related to the crisis at hand. Increased the A-level scholarship funding. Again, nothing really to do with the need to address the crisis. Increase the funding and maximum amounts for both undergraduate and graduate scholarships. Yeah, that was something we also did as well. And offered a $1,500 stipend to scholarship recipients to travel to get their visas. No mention there of the current crisis that we're facing. Committed funding and a policy to build 100 affordable homes. Again, it's not in response to the crisis. So, none of those things that he says, they're all good things that they have done. The important thing to remember about this too, Austin, is that all of these COVID things were all started and commenced by the previous government. And they are just simply a continuation of stuff that has already been in train. And secondly, a number of these initiatives that he spoke of, just for example, the building of the 100 homes, that's going to take years to achieve. It's not going to happen overnight.
Yes.
The crisis today is immediate. The relief is needed right now, not tomorrow. It's needed now.
Indeed, and that's why, again, I take it back to some of the recommendations you made. I think particular the reduction in stamp duty on fuel, even if it is just until the end of the year, deals with the here and now and the pressure that the citizens are facing. And I think those are the relevant kind of solutions the opposition and everyone's looking for from government.
That's true. And, you know, I particularly couched it and said, put it on there, extend it until the end of the year, because that gives government the flexibility
Yes.
that it will need. Come down to end of the year, if there's still a need for it, or to alter it in some way, you can do so. Or if it's, you know, times are good again, and these things are no longer a problem, you can end it.
Right.
But important, you've got to give government room and flexibility to be able to manage the policies and the assistance that they provide.
Exactly. Mr. Leader, we've talked about, and you've highlighted from the Premier's comments, what they've done up to this point.
Yeah.
The Premier also went on to mention plans for the future. I wonder if you could share those with our audiences.
Yeah, a very good question too, Austin, because he did outline a number of plans that they are going to do and roll out to the public. He spoke, first of all, about the expansion of the offerings of Cineco to allow Cineco to get into providing other programs of insurance like property and casualty, and also looking at developing other types of health insurance policies that could be rolled out because simply the SHIC or standard health insurance contract is completely and mostly inadequate to meet the needs of the populace with regard to health insurance. It really is inadequate. But again, that doesn't get started until next year, is what they were saying. Because I asked the question of the CEO of Cineco when we were looking at the appropriations on Friday morning. When are they putting this in place? And he said, we hope to start on the 1st of January.
Yes.
But I mean, they've got a lot of work to do to put this in place by January. But conceivably, it can be done. It can easily be done. Through CIDB, we're making mortgages with fixed rates available for 2 years at 3.75%. Yes, acknowledge that is laudable, and it is less than the current prime rate, which by all accounts is going to be much higher, is only going higher. And but again, this is going to take time to put in place. They haven't got the funding to enable that, given the funding to enable the CIDB to start that process, and we don't know who is going to be eligible to do it. So it seems to me like they're a long way off in terms of getting this program in place, but I could be wrong, and I give them the opportunity to show that I'm wrong, but I do believe it'll take them a while to get a program like that off the ground. Accelerate the adoption of renewable energy, laudable aim and policy to have. I think we all agree that getting more and more renewable energy in the country is absolutely critical to dealing with the whole issue of climate and resiliency. And so it's very important, but those are years. Those programs take years to get into put them actually into practice. And we've had an energy policy now for many years, and it's a very slow process. So that's not going to happen overnight in terms of that. He also talked about they're going to deliver 100 homes, but that's, again, takes a few years to get done. Not going to happen overnight. And talk about making affordable land lots available. Again, that is very laudable, but again, it's going to take time. And, discussions ongoing. Now, they're going to have discussions with the banks with regard to their lending practices and lending policies and lending terms. Terms is the lending terms are the words that he used in there, and I wish them well with that. I think they face an uphill climb with it, but there may be some flexibility on the parts of the banks in terms of moderating or changing terms and conditions, but we'll see where they get to. And he talked about the rights of homeowners in circumstances where they experience defaults on their mortgages. Again, that is going to take a whole lot of time to put it into place. Working with local farmers to help them increase the amount of local products produced. Very laudable, we all agree with it. But again, it's going to take time for the farmers to get these crops into the ground and to reap them. So it's not happening anytime soon. And in lowering the cost of food and increasing our food security by sourcing them regionally. Good program. I wish them success with it. I really do. But again, it's going to take time to implement that as well. So none of these things that they talk about are going to really impact the average person anytime soon. The two that do are the two other policies that they did introduce, talk about, and that was the temporary assistance program for residential electrical costs. And what he did indicate that they're developing this program, they're setting about $5 million aside. Mm-hmm. I didn't see any funding from it in the latest round of budget approvals that they brought to Parliament last week. But be that as it may, they may have excess funding elsewhere in the budget that they can use to fund this. And he said in his statement there are about 22,000 people that would stand to benefit from that program over 3 months, July, August, and September. What that translates to is about, in round terms, $75 a month for those who might benefit from it if they're going to exhaust the $5 million. That's what it equates to. But that is one that has, will have immediate impact on the populace in terms of providing relief. And then the second one is the COLA, which the civil service will get in September, 2% in September. That will certainly, and the stipend, the $150 stipend for the civil servants to help them with their electricity through the season, through the summer months.
Yes.
Those things are going to have a real, direct, and appreciable impact. But again, it's just to civil servants, and it seems, except for the COLA, which is for all civil servants, but not all public servants, it doesn't go the whole way as I would probably would like to see.
Indeed. Well, as you pointed out, a lot of plans, only 2 of which could be implemented immediately. The others beginning perhaps as early as January, who knows? Meanwhile, according to the ESO report, housing up 20%, rent up nearly 13%, transportation relating to fuel costs up 35%. It is very clear the people of this country, as you stated, need help now.
Absolutely. What I would say too, looking back over, I said this in Parliament on Thursday when I asked the question, the areas where the ESO report shows the largest increases, utilities, housing, those things are the things that impact every Caymanian and impact them in a very big way. And that's the reason why we are finding ourselves in such a crisis situation right now, because it doesn't matter who. You need a car, you need transportation, you need to have electricity, you need to be able to buy food, and these are all the things you do. I mean, yes, so many other items in the basket, not everyone consumes. And so there is, it doesn't affect people as much. But the biggest increases are the ones that are hurting the most.
Finally, I noted that the government in the question and answer time finally acknowledged that it would no longer be pursuing the previously proposed bullet bond as a means of financing long-term debt. It would seem that the government has heeded the warnings of the opposition and acted correctly. Would you agree?
Yeah. My response to that, though, Austin, is thank God.
Quite right.
I have very strong feelings about that proposal when it was first floated in January. And I was quite vocal and quite adamant that that was not the right policy for government to be pursuing. And for all the reasons I enumerated then that we don't have time to go over now. So
Yes.
I'm glad, and I'm glad he's on the record as having stated that the government's not pursuing that. So I'm truly happy about that.
Indeed. Thank you so much. Indeed. Mr. McTaggart, I thank you very much for those comprehensive answers and taking the time out of your busy schedule to be with us here on Let's Talk. Certainly to our audiences, we hope you too have enjoyed today's discussion and found it to be informative. If you did, remember to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. If there is a discussion you would like to have us present here on Let's Talk, please feel free to leave those suggestions along with any other comments on our YouTube channel. Please tune in every Tuesday and Thursday at 4 p.m. for another episode of Let's Talk, exploring the issues affecting all of our lives. I'm your host, Austin Harris. Until next time.